Good afternoon. My name is Royletta Romaine. I am the owner of Healing by the Forkful. I'm a registered dietitian and a certified LEAP therapist from Boston, Mass. LEAP stands for Lifestyle, Eating, and Performance. I help my clients reduce or stop inflammation, symptoms of inflammation, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, migraines with food, not medicine. You can find me on Instagram at Healing by the Forkful, or you can email me at healingbytheforkfulrd@gmail.com. My mini podcasts are short and to the point. A few times a month, I will bring you a new person who has been helped with what I call a personalized anti-inflammation blueprint, and they share their stories with you. Please send me an email if you have questions or would like to be on my podcast. My hope is to reach as many people, as I can to help them with something that they may not have heard of. So let's get started. Today I have a fellow certified LEAP therapist, and her name is Susan Linke. I'm not sure if I'm saying your last name correctly. So she's been doing this for longer than I have, so I thought she would be a great person to give us explain how she explains it to patients, because we all have different understand things a little bit differently, and I feel like I want to have as many different therapists on so that maybe something will click and maybe you'll understand it better. Each time I have someone, I actually learn a little bit more, and I'm actually certified, so I'm sure that you're going to learn lots. So, Susan, please introduce yourself.
All right. Thank you, Orletta. I appreciate the opportunity. And my name is Susan Linke. I am a registered dietitian, and I have been a registered dietitian for about 20 years. It was my second career that I embarked on as a result of some family health issues. It made me start looking more into the nutrition path. And so I ended up turning it into a second career. And as soon as I finished with school, and during school, I was introduced to integrative and functional nutrition. And so when I finished school, I learned about the MRT test for food sensitivities and the LEAP protocol. And I just thought, this is exactly why I went back to school. So I started using it 20 years ago, and it's sort of turned me into a workaholic because I enjoy it so much that I just, in 20 years, it's just never gotten old.
You must have so many stories, so many great success stories.
Yes. People's lives have just been turned around. So it's very, very heartwarming, rewarding. It's turned into a ministry, really. So when I first became a Christian, actually 45 years ago, I asked God for a healing ministry, and I thought, I envisioned myself maybe praying for people, laying on of hands or whatever. And, one day I just sat back and thought, you know what? God has given me a healing ministry. Absolutely. And it's through this, it's amazing.
That's so wonderful, because a lot of people have God in their lives. I certainly do, but a lot of people turn to God as a last resort, and I think it's funny. A lot of people turn to LEAP as a last resort because they just don't know what to do. And fortunately, we know that it helps.
It absolutely does. The body, we are definitely fearfully and wonderfully made, and God has designed our human body to heal. That's just, we have an immune system that's unbelievable. And when we learn how to allow that immune system to do what it's designed to do, it can do it, and it can do it really quickly. That's the fascinating part about all this too, is that most of our clients turn a corner within 10 days, even if they've been suffering for years. And I was sitting on the couch one day just marveling at that. And I was thinking about paper cuts as a way to exemplify what the immune system can do and how quickly. But if you get a paper cut, for example, you can sit there and stare at your skin for just a few minutes and you'll have a scab. And that's how quickly your immune system mobilizes on your behalf whenever you have a little injury like that. And the immune system that we can see is the same immune system on the inside that we don't see. The problem is, on the inside, we're constantly consuming things that the immune system was never designed to handle, junk food or a lot of, prescription drugs or NSAIDs or whatever. And so our immune system is constantly battling those things, and it never is allowed to do what it's allowed to do. So the LEAP protocol really allows the immune system to do what it's supposed to do, and it removes those things that are hindering the immune system from functioning at its best. So the cool thing about it is it's primarily diet. So it allows people to get back to normal. And that is one thing I've noticed is
no side effects.
No side effects. That's right. Yeah, all that little writing like you get on television when you see the commercials, it may cause death, but go ahead and ask your doctor to give it to you.
Well, you definitely won't have the problem anymore.
Yeah, you definitely won't. That's true. But yeah, so usually in as little as 10 days, we see a good 50% reduction in symptoms on average. So, I've seen improvement in people that had been bleeding with ulcerative colitis for 9 months or 10 months, and in 10 days they quit bleeding, or people whose rheumatoid factors normalized in 30 days.
Amazing.
The stories just go on and on and on and on. How people, their lives have just been turned around. Migraines, irritable bowel, inflammatory bowel disease, autoimmune conditions, thyroid antibodies coming back to normal.
It's crazy how going back to the basics really helps all of these things.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing.
Yep.
So can you just give us more of an example of what exactly MRT and why the MRT is the gold standard for determining food sensitivities?
Sure. So there's 2 types of food sensitivity tests out on the market. The majority of them are measuring IgG levels directly, for example. And MRT does not do that. It's more of an endpoint measurement. The immune system has a lot of mechanisms in its arsenal. I call it guns and bullets. So one of the mechanisms or tools that the immune system has are antibodies. IgG is right there at the brush border. You've also got IgA.
Right.
But ultimately, down the road, what ends up causing inflammation and symptoms is the release of mediators by your white blood cells called interleukins, prostaglandins, TNF alpha. Those are the ones that really reach the target tissues and cause all the damage. So just because your IgG levels are elevated doesn't necessarily translate to your white blood cells releasing these harmful inflammatory mediators. So that's what you want to measure. And I can sort of give you allergy as an example because most people understand allergy a little bit better. But in the case of allergy, you can have an elevated IgE, but ultimately it is histamine that causes the runny nose, the watery eyes, or the anaphylaxis, et cetera. So whenever you get an allergic reaction, you don't run and get an anti-IgE medicine. You run and get an antihistamine, because the gun for allergy might be IgE, but the bullet, the one that causes all the damage, really is the histamine. And that's why some doctors will prick your back and look for whelps and see what foods are causing that histamine release. So it's sort of, in a parallel way, food sensitivities could be similar. You can have elevated IgG. Does that necessarily mean that you're producing interleukins when you eat a particular food? You don't know, because somewhere in between those two, the immune system could kick in and stop that inflammatory process from happening. And also, it's not just antibodies. You could have a T cell mediated reaction as well, which is actually more common for a lot of conditions. So the MRT is able to measure both antibody and cell-mediated reactions. So it's more comprehensive than just looking at a single piece of straw in a haystack.
Mm-hmm. Wonderfully explained. During, while I was studying for the test, I watched obviously several of your videos, and each time I watch it, now that I'm listening to you again, I learn more, and it becomes easier for me to explain. It will be easier for me to explain this to my patients. So, can you tell me about the protocol? There aren't a lot of studies on the protocol, and a lot of people say that it's not really something that you should follow. We have all of these influencers and things saying things about this test. What do you say to that? I mean, I know it works because I've experienced it. I've done the therapy, and I continue to do the LEAP protocol. So, but can you help explain that to some others?
Sure. So the protocol is very unique, and it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because most of the time when people get food allergy or food sensitivity testing done, they are told, well, you reacted to broccoli and apples, so don't eat broccoli and apples. And that's basically the extent of the advice that you get. The problem with that is you can almost react to anything under the sun. And it's impossible. There's never going to be a test large enough to test for everything you consume, because in addition to foods, you can react to spices, and there's tons of those. You can react to the citric acid or natural flavors, and there's all kinds of additives added to our foods, thousands. So if you just avoid your broccoli and apple and you go your way, but you're eating all of these other things, unbeknownst to you, that might be reactive because they weren't on that test, right? Most tests will look at 50, 100, 200, maybe even 300 things. Mm-hmm. But when there's thousands of foods and additives, they're all going to fall short in terms of the number of foods tested. So,
right. And everything, we have so many new products coming out every single year, and changes in how foods are produced, and changes in how fillers are used for different foods. So it's kind of an ongoing thing. You just really need to take good care and look.
Absolutely. So you might feel a little better if you avoid your broccoli and your apple, but you're going to be, statistically speaking, you're going to be consuming inflammatory foods unbeknownst to you because they weren't tested. So how do we solve that problem? Well, the way that we solve the problem, and it's really common sense, but it's genius, I think, is we ignore the foods that come back reactive for you, and we just focus on the foods that come back safe. Right. Because if we can hone in on what foods are safe for you, and we do this for 4 weeks, then by default, not only will you be avoiding the tested reactive foods, but now you're going to be avoiding all of your untested reactive foods because you won't be eating anything untested. Right. So the chances of having a meal plan or a diet that is 100% anti-inflammatory for you now is very high. And so if there's no inflammation coming in from the outside, then your immune system starts calming down very, very quickly, just like that paper cut. And that's why most people, somewhere between day 7 and day 10, do experience a very significant improvement in their symptoms. And by the end of the 4-week period, most people notice an 80 to 100% improvement in symptoms. And after that, we can start normalizing the diet by trying those untested foods. And if you haven't had a migraine in 3 weeks, if your diarrhea is resolved, and then we try an untested item and the migraine comes back or the diarrhea starts up again, that helps us identify those untested foods as well. So the protocol takes all of that into account. There is a strategy.
I love that it's systematic and we know exactly what's going on. A lot of times when you see things online, you're like, stop this, 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 and this. But if you don't know that that's what's actually causing the problem, you're never going to get the detail that you need to help you move through the process.
That's true. And the other nice thing about testing is, some people will say that a regular elimination diet is the gold standard, but I disagree with that because they're assuming that you can feel all of the foods that cause inflammation. But unfortunately, that is not true because inflammation fuels cardiovascular disease, it fuels cancer, it fuels hormone disruptions, and those aren't necessarily something you can feel by just doing a regular elimination diet. Absolutely. So having lab work to help identify foods that are causing very subtle symptoms or no symptoms overtly, then that is really a game changer.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So again, you've been doing it for a while. What do patients say is the hardest part of following the protocol?
I think probably just not being able to go eat out and eat whatever. But most people, before they ever start the program, I discuss it with them. And when they do test, they're really mentally ready to do it. And if for some reason they're in college, maybe they may postpone taking the test until summer. Or if they have vacation or a big wedding or whatever, they can postpone doing the program until they're ready. So most people are ready when they start the program. So really it's not that difficult because we have lots of food. We test 146 foods. And so we can make pretty good recipes and things like that, and just learning how to make substitutions, learning how to use almond flour maybe, or almond milk or things like that, and just making substitutions. So we don't have to turn a person's diet upside down. We just can tweak it. And with our plenty of choices.
I'm sorry, Susan. I just think that's so wonderful about working with dietitians. We are the food professionals. We know how to make substitutions. We know how to move things around so that you can enjoy them, because so many people, they get a list of things that they're not supposed to eat and they're just like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? So it's good to work with dietitians because it just goes more seamlessly because you have someone following you through the whole process.
Absolutely. And I think it's harder personally if somebody were to give you a list of foods to avoid. That would drive me crazy because you'd have to take that list, and every time you buy an item at the grocery store, you'd have to see, okay, does this have soy in it? Does this have corn in it? Does this have whatever? And you just drive yourself nuts looking for those things that you have to avoid. But if we flip it around and say, you know what, go to the store and buy chicken, buy lettuce, buy some rice, buy this and it's all really positive. These are the things you can have. Just put this in your grocery cart. Then you don't have that stress of looking at every single thing to see if it has soy in it or corn in it or whatever. So it's really not restrictive, and it's a very positive approach. And the nice thing is people do start feeling better very quickly.
Right.
So the reinforcement of how they're feeling happens, quickly. So the reward is there.
Absolutely. So you've kind of mentioned this, but I just feel like the next couple of questions are the answers to the next couple of questions are just worth repeating. What are the most common issues that LEAP has been most successful in helping for you and your patients?
Well, every day we're sort of discovering more things that it helps with, because inflammation really is at the root of so many chronic conditions. But in general, if I had to say something, most of your immune system is in your gut. So the primary thing I would say that it helps is digestive type symptoms, be it reflux or stomach pain or diarrhea or constipation, those kinds of things. But then once that improves, then it sort of radiates to the rest of your body. Even better digestion. Some things you may have deficiencies in certain micronutrients because you're just not digesting properly. So once that gets fixed, then other things down the road, sort of a chain reaction, start improving as well. People have more energy, their mood is better, things like that. So digestive, I would say it's probably the number one. And then we also see improvement in chronic headaches or migraines, those types of things. But over the years, I mean, we've seen great improvement with fibromyalgia, autoimmune conditions. I've seen, especially with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, we've seen thyroid antibodies improving. Even with diabetes, we've seen blood glucose levels improving. We've seen fluid retention is a big hallmark of inflammation. So people that are not able to lose weight, especially because they're just retaining fluid, have found it a lot easier when they go to the gym to start losing weight. So those are big ones. We've had good success with Crohn's disease. There's so many autoimmune conditions, and I've seen improvement with lupus even. So, yeah.
So some of my podcast people have asked me how long it was before I felt change. And when I started to actually do the process, I didn't tell people what I was doing, and people were looking at me and saying, "You're not grimacing, you're not having problems, you're not doing this anymore." But it happened to me in like 5 days, and I was like utterly shocked. And so some of my friends have brought out to me that you were really fortunate and you pushed that a lot, because you had 5 days and people were saying that you were feeling well. So I tend to focus on that, but you're right. 10 days is what the average is. But what is the longest time that you've had to work with patients before they were actually able to see some change? Because I think a lot of people look at my story and they're like, well, it was 5 days. It's not. We're all individual. That's why the MRT is so important, because it's just so individualized. But some of us take longer, but it's worth the wait.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of people have seen improvement in 5 days. We just noticed over time that, maybe 80% of people by day 7 feel a really good turnaround in symptoms. But I think 10 days is more realistic for including 99% of our clients probably see improvement within that 10-day period. Occasionally, and again, it's just the beginning. the 10 days is just the beginning. So it's very, very, very rare not to see any improvement in that 10-day period. And if that's the case, the usual culprit is something that somebody accidentally included in their diet that shouldn't have. For example, I had a client one time with severe chronic pain, and he was doing much better. But one day he called me and he said, on a scale of 1 to 10, my pain is at a 15. And so we looked at his food diary, and it was squeaky clean, except for his roasted peanuts had tapioca starch. And tapioca starch was very reactive for him. But sometimes those sneaky things get in, because you just grab a jar of roasted peanuts and you'd never think they had tapioca starch. But anyway, it took 3 days for his pain to go away. But so that's usually the case. If people are not feeling better after 10 days, there's usually something that accidentally snuck in. And there are sneaky things. Most people don't realize that the baking powder usually has cornstarch. So if you're reactive to corn, you have to be careful with your baking powder. Some salts, like kosher salt, will usually have an anti-caking agent. Sometimes it's dextrose, which is usually corn derived. So there are little minefields here and there. So keeping a food diary can help us if somebody's not feeling better. But most people, after a total of 4 weeks, are usually anywhere from 80 to 100% better. Some conditions, like eczema, clear up in 10 days, but some cases, or even like psoriasis, some cases are just a slower process, and maybe it takes 2 or 3 months for the psoriasis to resolve. But as long as we're seeing progress in the right direction, we know we're, it's like I tell my patients, if you're heading in the right direction, then you'll get where you want to go. So just keep going.
Absolutely. What are some of the biggest success stories that you've come across in your practice?
They're all different. For me, one rewarding, and it may not be miraculous, but I just remember one grandmother just grieving because her grandchildren were in England and she had to stay around a toilet. There was no way she was going to be able to board a plane. So she hadn't been able to go see her grandchildren in who knows how long. And so after she did the LEAP protocol, her diarrhea resolved and she was able to go see her grandchildren. So even though that may not be miraculous, it was definitely life-changing for her. And I had, people too one lady worked at a doctor's office and she had horrible diarrhea too. So in between patients, she'd have to go use the toilet. I mean, what a way to work, right? And so she was able to stop that and resume normal work without having to sit on the toilet. One of my first clients had been on sick leave for 9 months because he couldn't leave the toilet. And he called me, and I think the night before he called me, he was so weak, his blood pressure was so low from all the diarrhea that his friends literally had to come over to his apartment and pick him up off the toilet and put him in bed. And so he couldn't even come to see me to pick up his kit. So I had to drive to his apartment and physically hand him the kit so that he could get his blood drawn. But then he was becoming suicidal because I think he was 55 at the time.
No quality of life.
He was starting to have suicidal thoughts. And so I called him, so we started the protocol, and I called him after 10 days to check on him. And oh my goodness, he his symptoms were almost completely gone. And his gastroenterologist had told him, your symptoms are all in your head. He was on a bunch of medications, antidepressants, on and on. And then I called him a year later. So he was able to go back to work after 10 days. After having been on sick leave for 9 months, in 10 days.
Oh
Yeah, in 10 days he was back at work. And then I called him back a year later to see how he was doing. And he just picked up the phone and he said, I'm in a meeting. Can I call you back? So, you know, even after a year, he was doing wonderfully. So, yeah, lots of stories like that.
So I didn't ask you, I usually give you the questions and everything beforehand, but can you give me, do you have an example off the top of your head? Because I know you've seen a lot of people who have had fibromyalgia, that you can give us a success story or a migraine success story.
Yeah, I had a patient who had migraines for, I think it was 3 years, every week for 3 years. And she had tried everything. She tried Botox, she tried the prescription drugs, everything she could think of, and nothing worked. And so because I do a lot of telehealth, I do send patients their results, and then they bring their results to come in and see me. And back in that day, I did have a brick and mortar. Right now, I'm just telehealth. Mm-hmm. But she walked into the office to go over her results for the first time, and she said, my migraines are gone. And I said, what happened? And she had noticed that 2 of the foods on her no-no list were apples and onions. And she said she religiously ate 2 apples a day because it supposedly keeps the doctor away. And she said that she loved onions. So she put onions in everything. And so when she saw those 2 things on the list, she immediately took them out, and her migraines of 3 years instantly went away.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So that was just, and you know what? She never did follow the protocol. You know, I will say she never did follow the protocol because her migraines were gone and she was ecstatic. So not everybody is so miraculous.
But that is just so significant because it happened so quickly as well. Wow.
Yeah. And then I've had a lot of patients with fibromyalgia too. Fibromyalgia and usually other things that have improved as well. So, yeah.
Anything specific that you can think about success stories about people who have had joint pain?
Yes. I had one person who had pretty severe, well, like my patient with the tapioca starch in the, he was sleeping. He hadn't been able to sleep in his bed for a long time because of the joint pain. And he was having to sleep in a recliner. And, so his pain was at a level 10 constantly. And so, you know, except for that episode with the tapioca starch in his peanuts, his pain went back down to a 2 really, really quickly. He was able to start sleeping in his bed again. I had another lady who had severe neuropathy, and the doctor told her she was going to end up in a wheelchair. And she was young. If I remember correctly, I think she was in her 30s, maybe, with severe neuropathy. And the only relief she ever got from her neuropathy, and it started in her legs and it was starting to spread to her arms. And the only relief she got was to walk because it would numb her legs. And she didn't have diabetes, by the way. So it would numb her legs so she would walk. And then one day she noticed a bunch of blood on the floor, and she thought, well, my cat must have brought in a mouse or something. And so she looked all over for a dead mouse, and it was her.
Oh my God.
She had stepped on a nail, and so she was bleeding everywhere, but because of the neuropathy, the numbness, she didn't feel it. So that's how bad she was. And a lot of times vitamin D deficiency, which most of my patients are low in vitamin D. Vitamin D regulates the immune system, so that's something I always check. But vitamin D deficiency can cause chronic pain too. And so, I had her check her vitamin D levels. I had her ask her doctor, and the doctor really poo-pooed the idea. But he did anyway. He to appease me, he checked her vitamin D. And I think it was at an 18, which is really low.
Yeah.
And so she started her LEAP diet at the same time starting vitamin D supplementation. But the doctor was not familiar with vitamin D supplementation. So he must have asked a friend of his that's a pharmacist. That's all I can think of. Or maybe he just Googled it. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But he started giving her, so he gave her a 50,000 IU prescription. But usually with those prescriptions, you take once a week. Well, because he was unfamiliar with vitamin D, he told her to start taking it every day.
Oh, no.
Yeah. But it actually worked out in her favor. I mean, and then he, at some point, maybe like a week later, I think he figured it out, and he called her and he said, no, once a week. But anyway, so the point is she started LEAP, and she started basically front loading vitamin D, which worked in her favor, because she said 2 weeks later, the pain had completely resolved from one of her legs. And I think she said 90% better in the other leg. And she said, I literally danced into my doctor's office 2 weeks later. Yeah.
You're like, who are you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so. Actually, one more question.
Sure.
If anybody who's listening to this is on the fence about trying to follow this protocol and get their MRT test, what would you tell them?
Well, I usually like to ask my patients, have you been screened for anything serious? Has your doctor made sure that you don't have H. pylori if you have a lot of reflux or whatever? You do have to use your clinical judgment. And most people, by the time they call me, have already been to their doctor or multiple doctors, and they've tried a bunch of things and nothing works. I would strongly encourage, because this is benign. It's just diet. It's not going to hurt you. 80%, 70 to 80% of your immune system is in your gut. Most chronic conditions are fueled by inflammation, which starts in the gut. So, this is really the only way not the only way, but it's the fastest way to be able to get back to normal with a very natural approach. And there's no guesswork. So yes, for some people, maybe avoiding gluten and dairy, you can always try that and see if symptoms help. If your diet is very bad, you can always try cleaning up your diet. But the thing is, we can react to very healthy foods.
I was going to say, broccoli is clean, kale is clean.
Yeah.
And it still causes problems.
Absolutely. Like my patient with the apples and the onions causing her migraines. So you never know what it could be. So if you've tried eliminating gluten and dairy, or if you've tried, and I don't say everybody has to do that, but for a lot of people, it does help. Or if you've tried just cleaning up your diet, a lot of people do feel better, but maybe not 100%. So if you've tried everything and nothing works, then test, don't guess.
Absolutely. Oh, it's so wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we close up?
Well, I could go on and on and on with stories.
Yeah, I think Susan doesn't know this yet, but I think we're going to plan another session when we can just go over success stories, because I think that I just it amazes me each time that I hear somebody
Yeah,
who has come to see us, and it often is a last resort. You've given up, you don't know what you're going to do, and then here comes this protocol, and 10 days you're feeling better. And it's just like, I've been through all of these doctor's appointments, I've been through all of these medications, I've skipped family outings and trips and things like that, and I could have just followed the protocol, saved myself a lot of time and a lot of money, and a lot of discomfort. So I think we're going to have a couple of other sessions where we just go over success stories, because it's
yeah,
just so
they're fun.
wonderful.
They're fun,
Yeah.
and they're not the exception to the rule. They actually are the
Mm-hmm.
majority of the rule.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So absolutely.
Awesome, awesome. So it's been so great having you share all of this with my listeners. And I just want our listeners to remember that lots of disease states are started by or influenced by inflammation, like we talked about arthritis, brain fog, joint pain, and we can go on and on. So if you're out there wondering and you don't know, remember, I don't just give you the results of your test. We go over them, we find solutions, and I review the results with you and support you through the entire process until you are in a less inflamed life, if you will. So why not just start with food? Let's get you started. Susan's information will be posted at the bottom, as will mine, and we both look forward to helping you feel better. Thanks so much for your time,
All
Susan.
right. Thank you, Orletta. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks.